Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the toolbox. The toolbox is just these things here. So we have the selection tool, which is this arrow. The short key to it is Q. You want to go to selection tool, you go to Q. It just brings out a tool where we can select different objects. You can marquee and draw and select multiple objects. And guys, I'm clicking and dragging across the scene to select a particular object. Now, the marquee doesn't need to completely encompass the whole object. Once it just touches the object, it will select it. Okay, so if you don't want to select that one, you make sure it doesn't touch that object. Then we have this one that makes us select based on drawing a lasso around a certain object. So I could draw a lasso, and just similar to Photoshop, I can draw a lasso. At the same time, I could draw a lasso, or I draw a lasso that will make me make a selection across some particular object. Maybe I don't want to select certain objects in my scene, just a few objects. Okay, so this marquee, for instance, if I hold down the Alt key, I can move around and redraw it. That's just in case when I was drawing this, I realized this wasn't the object I want to select. So if I hold down the Alt key, I could reposition the marquee to select this one instead. So it's kind of something that was taken from Photoshop, but it's kind of handy though. This is a brush selection, so this one enables us to select components. So like if I have this guy and I use the brush tool, it will enable me. You see the sphere has turned to blue. It was initially green, so this will help me select components. So right now it's selecting edges. You can see the orange points of the kind of like brushing away. If I change this to vertex mode, I just held right click to get into the vertex mode, so I can now paint certain vertices and you see them turning yellow. So that means this is a selection being made. So this brush tool help me select certain objects or certain components. I can increase the size of the brush by holding down the B key and left clicking and dragging to the left or right. Make the brush so that it can make the selection a whole lot wider. Okay, so that's what this brush is used for. All right, so I go Q again and deselect this, right click and object mode. Okay, now these are the tools for translation, transformation. We have the move tool, which helps translate the object to any direction. We have I need to explain the axis, so let me talk about the axis now. We talked about the X, Y, and Z axis. Okay, so whenever you have an object, this is our grid and this is a point of origin. So let me delete all these objects first of all. Now this is our grid. It has a point of origin. Point of origin means anytime we create an object, it's going to create itself here based on the center pivot of that point, the center or the anchor point of that object. So if I create a cube, for instance, you see the cube is created not on top of the grid but based on the central part of the cube. If I go into my shading now and go into X-ray mode, you can see through the cube that the center of the cube is what is on this point of origin. So that's what we call a point of origin. Okay, so minus the point of origin, then we have these little gizmos. Now these are called gizmo, the axis handles. Okay, we have a small representation of it here to tell us which part of the scene we are. So as I'm going around the scene, you see it changing. You can't see it well, let me switch to a darker view so you could see the axis changing. Okay, so the green arrow stands for the y-axis, the red stands for the x-axis, and the blue stands for the z-axis. So and the direction in which the arrows point is the positive direction. So if I want to move this object along the x-axis, all I do is click on the arrow on the red and move it, and it will move the object based on the x-axis, constrain its movement to the x-axis. The other one will constrain its movement to the y-axis. I used Alt and Home to come back to this view. Then this will constrain its movement to the z-axis. So movement here is very important, understanding how to move an object, constraining it to a particular axis. Now there are also times I want to make a movement constraining to two axes at a time, and that will make me select all these colored boxes right here and call them axis bands. So now note this, the color of the box determines the axis I'm not moving in. Okay, you can see the color of the axis. We have red, we have green. Don't worry, I don't mind that it's yellow. It's yellow because it's what I was selected. It's actually green. Okay, so it's actually a green arrow here. So whenever I select an axis, it turns yellow, so you can know that that's what you recently used. Okay, so now red is for X, green is for Y, blue is for Z. If I want to work on a particular axis band, for instance, if I select the red, it means the object, no matter how hard I try, will not move on the x-axis. So let me come into the other orthographic view so that we can see what I mean here. I know these guys must have changed a bit. Okay, so right now this is my perspective view. Okay, I'm going to click on the red, and in my orthographic views I can see there's red here for my top view. That is this is the red axis, positive and negative, left and right, and on my front view I'm seeing it also here. If I click on the red, no matter how hard I try, it's not going to move on the left or the right of this and this axis. So watch this. No matter how hard I try to move, it doesn't go on the left and on the right for the top view and the front view. Okay, if I click on the blue band, we have blue here, we have blue here. So that means moving on the blue will not move this box up or down on this view, or left and right on this view. So no matter how hard I try, it will not move along the blue axis. Okay, the same thing with the green axis. So wherever we have green, you do not go up on these two views. So no matter, even if I think I'm moving up from here, from this view, you see that it's not actually going up, it's just moving plain. So this is very helpful in alignment of our objects at most cases. If I want to move this box around my grid but make sure it doesn't go up, all I need to do is click on the green and it keeps sliding on the grid, and I know that it's always going to be on the ground level no matter where I slide it to, because it will never come off the ground. So you can see that. Okay, so this is very important for movement of our tools. All right, good. So a few points to note. Okay, so there's another one. We have the rotation tool. The rotation tool also has colors. We have the red, the green, and the blue. Then we have the inner circle and the outer circle. Now if I want to rotate along the y-axis, now this is a tricky part. When I say rotate around the y-axis, it doesn't mean I'll rotate based on the fact that the y-axis is pointing up and down, that is how the rotation will go. You just imagine creating, if this is your arrows now, imagine creating a circle at the bottom of each of the arrows. So to rotate along the y-axis, I will draw a circle on the grid here. So let me use something to describe that. Let me add a circle to my scene here. Okay, so look at this circle. Rotating on the y-axis means from the way the arrow is pointing, I draw a circle on the ground. So in that direction, that is how the axis will rotate. To rotate along my x-axis, I will make my circle face this direction. Okay, so that is my x-axis. Okay, so this is my x-axis. I draw a circle around my x-axis, so that means the object will rotate in this axis. And the same with the z-axis, I will make my object be this way. So rotating around the z-axis is imagining I have my z-axis pointing this way and the circle is drawn at the bottom. So it's quite it could be quite confusing at some point, but just understand that wherever the axis is, draw a circle at the bottom of the arrow, then that's the direction of the rotation. So like for instance, this is my y-axis is up, so the green is here. So that means if I rotate this way, it's going to rotate around my y-axis. You can see on my channel box here that it is rotating on the y-axis. Okay, to rotate on the z-axis, this is the direction of the z-axis. So you see it's going to, let me position this guy here. So you see rotating this, it's going to rotate on that z-axis, even though because there are some other stuff here. So let me just turn this y-axis back to 0. Okay, so rotating on the z-axis will make me rotate only on the z-axis. Okay, that's clicking on the blue. Okay, and clicking on the red will make me rotate on the x-axis. All right, so then rotating without clicking on a specific color or a specific line will make me rotate arbitrarily, so I can rotate on all axes at a time. Okay, so sometimes this is not really helpful because you can't really constrain a particular rotation, but it makes you rotate arbitrarily. Okay, clicking on this yellow handle at the bottom doesn't make you rotate arbitrarily per se. It makes you rotate based on your camera view. So if I click on this edge here and rotate, it makes a movement not as arbitrary as possible, but based on how I'm looking at my object. If I rotate my scene to look at the object this way and rotate, it only rotates on that angle, no matter what, it doesn't come off. Okay, so just based on the way I look at my screen, that's how the rotation works. Okay, so let me delete this. Then we have the third one, which is a scale tool. The scale tool can scale an object on the green axis, which is the y-axis, on the x-axis, or on the z-axis. Scaling on any of the colors as well, just like we did with the movement, will make us scale in any axis that is not red. So that's it increases it on the z and the y, but doesn't increase on the x-axis. The same thing with this, increases on the x and the y, not on the z-axis, and this increases it on the z and the x-axis and not on the y-axis. So this clicking in the middle here will make it scale uniformly on all axes. Okay, so it's important to click on them. We can't select and click outside to scale. Okay, you have to be on the object on either of the tools. So the shortcut, like I said, for the selection tool is Q, for the move tool is W, for the rotate tool is E, and for the scale tool is R. Just like Q, W, E, R on your keyboard as they follow each other. That's how they follow themselves there. Okay. All right, so still on movement, we have what we call pivot. What is a pivot? This is the pivot, this central points here of our object, that's its pivot. So that tells us the center of the object. Now you can change the center of the object, maybe just because you want to add a particular kind of rotation or movement to that object. So right now I have a cone on my scene, and you can see how easy it is to create objects. You just click on them and they are created here. So the pivot of your object actually affects the way the object moves. So like here, if I want to rotate this cube on the Y axis, you see it's just rotating along its path. It's not moving from the point, it's just right there. So what if I want to change the pivot of this point? Okay, so all I do is I select D key. While holding down the D key, you will see it changes to an arrow with a circle, and it kind of targets in the middle. Or I click on the insert key. I usually prefer to click on the insert key so I don't need to hold down any keyboard. Holding down the D key, I can shift the pivot to this point of the cube, and now when I rotate the cube, it rotates along that point. That point now becomes the center of the cube. Okay, so I'm hitting the Z key to undo my changes. The same thing, you can use the insert to just click on insert, like this one. I click on insert key so that it turns to that object. I don't need to hold it down. Then I can drag and put the pivot on top here. Then once I'm done, I click on insert again. Now in a situation where I have, let me make two cones and move this one here. So in a situation where I want to rotate this cone, you see me, I will rotate the cone generally, and it's just rotating freely around itself. But if I come here to do that and I rotate it, it's rotating based on that angle where I put the pivots. Okay, so it's that's how we work on pivots to change the direction of our object. So probably I want to rotate this cone and put it on top of this cube. I can go this way, then I can now move it and place it right there. Okay, so I now know that it's just hanging on a cube. Now I use the blue axis band because I didn't want it to move forward or backwards, but I just wanted it to move left and up so that it can position itself here. So it's very key stuff. I want to be sure about that. You can see it on the orthographic views, and you notice that it's actually hanging on the top of the edge of that cube. So that's what makes us sometimes change pivots of an object. Sometimes we want to change the pivot and put it outside of the object. Okay, so that when you rotate the object, it's rotating based on that point. It doesn't really have to be on the object, it could be on other objects entirely. So that's why we will change the pivots of our objects. Okay, so I'll just undo all that. Let me just delete this. Let me turn my shading back to smooth shade, turn off the X-ray, create a new cube. Kind of have a liking for cube, almost like I like eating sugar or something. Not really. Now I have this cube. I move this one here and I create another cube. Okay, so notice on the channel box we have translate 0, 0, 0, rotate 0, scale 1. Scale 1, that means you can see it. If its scale is 0, you won't see the object. But this one, because I've increased its size and moved it along the grid, I can see there are different figures here. Now 4.877 or 0.869, that means I lifted it up on the y-axis and moved it on the x-axis. Then I scaled it up. So there's something we call freeze transformation. Freeze transformation is something that will help us to authenticate the position of a particular object and make that its point of origin. Typically, when you create an object, this is the point of origin. So what if this particular cube, I want its default origin to look like this? I want this cube to look as if this is how it was created. Okay, so I need to make all these numbers turn back to 0. If I just come and manually change them to 0, the cube will jump back to this point. But I want wherever this cube is right now to be its point of creation. So that's where we have what we call freeze transformations. Okay, so if I come under my modify, okay, I now have my freeze transformations here. So if you click, anytime you see a menu, you have this box. You click on that box, it gives you more settings for the object or the tool you want to use. So right now, freeze, I want to freeze the translate, the rotate, and the scale. Joint orient is if I'm working on a skeleton and I want to freeze the joint orient. So I'm telling it here, lock normals. That is never normals is how the objects display. I will show you what normals mean in a short while. So if I click freeze transform or apply any of them at that moment, you notice what happens on the channel box here. So watch this, freeze, everything is now zeroed out. So now when I move an object, it's calculating its movement with relation to where it was here. Okay, it's not relating it to when it was when I created it. So it's assuming that that position that I just moved from is the point of origin, just like how this one is. Okay, so if I move this object, scale it up, kind of rotate it arbitrarily, we just move it down a little bit. Now I want to bring it back to its point of origin, how it should have been. I can come in here and do reset transformations. I take it back to where it was before, and if I do that, watch what happens. It takes it back to where it was when I froze its transform. Okay, so the object is looking at it as if that is where it was when I froze its transform. Even though the gizmo appears in the point of origin, is assuming that this is where the cube's point of origin is. Okay, so the same thing with this one. If I shift it and push it off screen and I can't see it, as long as it's selected, I can come in here and do reset transform and it brings it back in there. So the freeze and reset transformation helps us to authenticate the position, scale, rotation of an object depending on how we want the object to be displayed. Okay, so and like right now this cube, if I if you notice as this cube is selected, let me delete this one so that we see what I mean. As the cube is selected, you notice that the gizmo is kind of outside of the cube. Okay, so even if I want to rotate, the cube is rotating from that point. So even though I froze transformation, it took the gizmo back to the point of origin when I did the reset. I want to take this guy back to the center of this object. So how do I do that? Still under the modify, I can come here and do center pivot, so it will centralize the pivot back to my cube. Okay, but notice something, the arrow is still pointing, X is still pointing to the left, and Z is this way, and the y-axis this way. This is kind of off because my cube is slanting, so that means the y should be somewhere here. The reason why this is because my gizmo is still on the world axis. So world axis means the way it is in the scene, the original way from the point of origin, how it's pointing here, that's the world axis. But there are times you want to make your axis point in the object's axis. So, and in modeling you actually want to do that a lot. So the way we can do this is to either click on our tools box here or double click on the object here. So if I double click on the move tool and now come to my tool settings, I can see my axis orientation is world. Okay, if I change it to object, you notice that okay, because I froze that transformation. So let me kind of delete this one first of all, since it's kind of going to be confusing. So let me just create a new cube here. Okay, so let's say I rotate this cube this way, okay, and come back to the arrow. You can now see it's pointing, the y-axis moved along with the rotation of the cube. Okay, if I come into the settings, you'll see that's because it's on object mode. If I come to world mode, watch what happens. The arrow swaps back to the world axis. And when you are doing modeling, you want to have your axis follow the objects, so that when I align an object, the way the object is facing is the way the axis will face. So you want to change to world mode. You can change to any other mode. The most common is objects and world. The other one that can be used sometimes is also normal. So these are things that come in play when we are doing our modeling. They are essential things to remember. So as we are going on, we will use them and you will see their importance. So I just wanted you to observe them and get familiar with them, so that when we get into those points, they won't look new to you.